Good afternoon. This is a Devar Torah on Megillahs Ruth, or if you prefer Ruth, Megillahs Ruth, which will be read this Shavuos, which is going to be this Sunday night, Monday, and Chutz the Tuesday night. And what I would like to discuss is two aspects of Ruth. I'd like to give briefly her historical background, and then I would like to share a deeper meaning of Ruth based on Remez, allusion, Allusion, not illusion. And first of all, who was Ruth? Now, part of the story is known that Ruth was the answer descendant is David and Melech. That part of the story is known, but where did she originate from? She was a princess in Moab, and Moab, where did the country of Moab begin? And if we look at it, Moab was started from very questionable sources, and what happened? Lot, Abraham's nephew, chose to live in Sodom and Gomorrah. They were, when Hashem decided to punish both cities, he and his daughters fled there, and they both thought, and the two daughters thought that when they escaped to the hill mountain, that only they and him, his two daughters, and he, Lot, were still alive. The rest of the world had been destroyed. And they gave the father wine, and when he became drunk, the older of the two girls lay with him, was with him, and she got pregnant from that. And the second one did the next night did the same thing, and he had no knowledge of it. Now the older one had a son, and he called him Moab, which means from my father. And what did the younger one call her? The younger one called it son of my people. Ben Ami, son of my people. And much less brazen. In any event, from those descended the tribes of Moab and the nations of Moab are unknown, and which each had a part to play in the Davidic dynasty, ultimately. And from the nation of Moab came Ruth. It was the merit of Ruth and Naamah, who was going to become the wife of King Shlomo Melech, Solomon, who was going to provide the next Davidic dynasty, son of the Davidic dynasty. She was from the second of the two nations, Amnon. And that was stage one of who she is. She, at the time, now, that's who she came from. It's explained that who was Ruth? She was also a Gilgal reincarnation of that daughter. Obviously, that daughter had being with her father was inappropriate, even if they thought they were the last people in the world. It was very questionable. They come from raising in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And according to that source, the Ruth was a Gilgal of her. In other words, she had her soul, and she came from. She had to do a tikkun, had to make good what she had, the problem she had caused earlier, and now that was one. According to many sources, she's also connected to Tamar. Tamar was another link in the Davidic dynasty, what was going to become the Davidic dynasty. She was married to Yehuda's son Er and Onan, who both died for not wanting to have children with her, so to speak. And she then became they both killed. Yehuda did not realize the reason was because of their Averot, Aaron Onan, and he didn't give the third son when he grew up to do Yibum. Now I'll explain briefly Yibum. When a man dies childless, he brother is supposed to take his wife as a wife. In other words, the second brother, sister-in-law, and the first child they have will be the child that be like the brother soul comes back. Again, explaining this in more detail beyond the scope of this Torah. I will be giving shares on the roots of the Davidic dynasty and Mashiach, and where I will explain this in a lot more detail. In any event, tomorrow was was with her father-in-law, who did not know who she was. In any event, two children were conceived, one of whom became the ancestor again of King David. And some say that it is said that Tamar and Ruth were very similar in the sense they both wanted to perform Yibum with their, in the case of Tamar, had to be with her father-in-law, and which was very unusual. And in the case of Ruth, with a cousin of the late husband. In any event, and who has been a product of the two of Yehuda and Tamar, descendant of theirs. And this again shows deep connections. According to some, Ruth is the same Neshama or Gilgal, reincarnation of Tamar. In any event, there's very close connections. Now, with that background, which is showing everything that had to be prepared for Ruth to take a role, I would now like to discuss the beginning of Megillahs Ruth, not on the level of Peshat. This is on a very different level. This is on the level of allusion, Allusion, not illusion. And it explains, I'm going to quote the first few psukim of Megillahs Ruth. And it, the Sefer starts out, book of Ruth, Megillah Ruth, actually. It starts off, Yehi b'yamei shoftim shoftim, haya rav ba'eretz b'yelad ish, Beis Lechem Yehuda, Begor, Besade Moav, Shehu Ishto and Mishnei Banav. And it happened in the days when judges judged, there was a famine in the land, and the man went from Beit Lechem and Yehuda to sojourn in the fields of Moab, he, his wife, and his living sons. And Vishem Ish Elimelech, and Vishem Ishto Naomi, and Vishem Shnei Banav, Bechulan, and Machlon and Kilian, Matam, Beis Lechem Yehuda, Hivo, Sednei Moav, Yehusham. And what were their names? The name of the son was Elimelech, the name of The man was Elimelech. The name of the woman, the wife's name was Naomi, and his sons, his sons were named Machlon and Kilion. Ephraim of Beit Lech and Yehuda. Then he killed in the fall of Moab and remained there. Then it goes on to describe Elimelech. Naomi's husband died, and she was left with her two sons. He married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth, and they lived about there about 10 years. Two of them died, Machlon and Kilion, and the woman was bereft of her children and of her husband. Then she went back, and she told the two wives, Orpah and Ruth, to go back. Orpah did, went back to the palaces of Moab, and she ultimately, in her evil ways, became the ancestor of Goliath, or Goliath in English, who King David eventually defeated. And Ruth went with Naomi and eventually was redeemed by Boaz. He was one of the Shoftim, one of the judges in the first temple era before there was kings. And in any event, this text sounds fairly descriptive, fairly basic, but if one looks into it deeper, and I'm basing this largely on the commentary of the Ramchal, and he says there's double language here. Now, everything in Tanakh, every letter of the Torah, every letter of the writings, which is Megillahs Ruth is, every one of the prophets, not one word, not one letter, not one comma, not one vowel is extra. Yet here we see, it says, after describing the circumstances, and Elimelech, even though he was quite wealthy, wanted to get away from Israel because he didn't want to help in the poverty, help in the famine, which created poverty. And it says, and a man went from Beit Lechem to Yehuda, sojourned to the fields of Moab, he, his wife, and his two sons. Then it goes on to describe that the man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi, and the two sons were named Machlon and Kilion. And Ephraim of Beit Lechem and Yehuda, they came to the fields of Moab, and then it describes how the husband died and the two sons married Moabite women. And that was a question why they would do that, but they were, in other words, were assimilating. And Naomi then goes to Ruth then follows Naomi back, they explained. Now, why the double language? He could have simply said in the first pasuk, and it happened in days judge, there was a famine in the land, and a man named Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and his two sons named Machlon and Kilion went to the fields of Moab, and there they remained. Why does it have to repeat it twice? The Ramchal wants to explain. They were talking about two separate groups of people. When it says the man and the woman and two sons of Moab, it wasn't talking about Elimelech at all. It was talking about Moshe Rabbeinu, his wife, Zipporah, and their two sons. Now, what was its connection to the fields of Moab? It's because Moshe had to die in Moab. He couldn't go in for reasons that when he broke the stones of speaking to it, which are too intricate to go into here. When we get to that parsha, I will be explaining it in a fair amount of detail. In any event, it's talking about Moshe and that he had to be in the fields of Moab. One of the reasons given is that if he hadn't been there, the generation that died in the desert would never merited resurrection. The Kiyat seem at the end of the days, Mashiach wouldn't have deserved that. It's only because of Moshe being with them. That being said, so what it's saying for now, at least at the time of Megillahs Ruth, Moshe and his family not living, but spiritually were present in Moab and in Israel. Now, Moshe couldn't get there. Now, so the second one is talking about Elimelech, but it can be understood like anything else in the Torah. We learned as Peshat, simple meaning, Remez, which is a deeper meaning, allusion, Drush, and which is used taking the Pasukim to extend to other concepts, and Sod, which means the secret stuff. And he explains, the Ramchal, that who does Elimelech represent? He represents the people who potentially could have become kings, the judges, and before the Davidic dynasty started. And who does Naomi represent? Knesset Israel, Jewish people, who are Machlan. Machlan represents Mashiach ben David, one who will to redeem Israel at the end of the days, which would be split in our days. And Kilian represented Mashiach ben Yosef Mashiach, who was also known as Mashiach ben Ephraim, the one who will do the ingathering. So all of that is correct, and the rest of the story talks about Ruth and how Ruth eventually will come to be redeemed to her husband's neshama because he died, Machlin died childless. And so what is this whole connection of Ruth from this? The Ramchal goes on to explain that even though we have the promise of Mashiach ben David and Mashiach ben Yosef in the long period of exile, and Moab here doesn't literally mean the country, the land of Moab. It means the exile of Asa and Rome, the fourth exile that we're currently still living in. And that exile will ultimately be so long, it's been going on for almost 2,000 years, that the Jewish people were scared. So something else was needed. Now, what was that? And this is where Ruth comes in. There is such a thing as spiritual genetics. I'm extrapolating a bit from what the Ramchal didn't put in quite those words. That the spiritual traits can be brought down. And what were those spiritual traits? Were that Lot get from Abraham? It was the quality of chesed, different aspects of kindness. And that was brought between the two, that was brought by the two women when they fathered children, mother children through their father. Those sparks of chesed, qualities of chesed, were not lost. And at the time of Ruth, she was carrying those genetics, spiritual genetics, and she was going to add that to the Jewish people and to the Davidic dynasty, that it was not that would add that extra quality of chesed which Jews afford. The whole holiday of Shavuos is dealing with that. If you look at the two daughters, even though they were somewhat evil, did it what they thought was for a good motivation, didn't realize for other people in the world. Still, that was one. So he provided that extra spark of chesed, which represents the Jewish people. She did. Now, what about the other nation, the other sister? That came through a descendant of that nation named Naamah, not to be confused with Naamah, that was the wife of Noah. This Naamah became the one of the wives of Shlomo Melech, King Solomon, and the one who provided the son of Shlomo that became the next chain and the Davidic dynasty. And they together provided the strength, give us the extra strength we need down to today. Now, there's a very interesting commentary, but it said this Megillahs Ruth is also containing reference to Moshe in the first pasuk. If that is the case, what is the connection of Moshe? And Ramchal explains, and this explanation of his is not accepted by all other rabbinical figures. There's a large debate on this, which I can only touch on here. Again, when I do the series on this whole Davidic dynasty, and I'll be going into more detail, is that Mashiach ben Yosef, or Ephraim, is going to do the ingathering, and then as explained by the Orach Chaim, based on source Sohar, that there will be two birds when you cure somebody from Metzora, from Saras, which is a crime of evil speech. They will be sprinkled. One of the birds will be killed over living water and with some other element, other things. They'll sprinkle the person with Saras. It's about to be cured from it 7 times. And those two birds, and then the bird will be sent out in the field. What does that represent? The first bird that's killed over living waters, that represents Mashiach ben Yosef, in gathering everybody. When he does his work, then Mashiach ben David, the second bird, will go out into the field, so to speak, and he will do battle with all the nations and show that all their ideas are false. And then, according to Ramchal, Moshe Rabbeinu will come back once the nations are all recognizing one God and worshiping him, and being there to help the Jews, serve the Jews. He will then come back and be king and Hashem's representative on earth. Again, others say that we have to land it more allegorically, that because all the source of all nations are Jewish people, that Hashem put it through Moshe. Therefore, in that very sense, he is going to be, has an aspect of Mashiach ben David, who will be the only king. He won't be king. And again, that is subject for another time. What I would do want to indicate is this is all part of a far larger master plan, and that what we're seeing now are the final, in our day, the final moves of that historical chain that has been going back to the time of Avraham Avinu and thereon, where Hashem is taking care of all of us, and that we will hopefully get through the pain of Ekav Mashiach, footsteps of Mashiach, Los Mashiach, the birth pangs of Mashiach, and we'll get to see Mashiach soon in the redemption. And I would like to wish everybody a good Yontif and a Hag Sameach.